Hello. Why isn't it focusing? What are we doing? Is that better or worse? I feel like that's worse. Should we wipe it with a fabric of some sort? Is that better? It still looks blurry, but I don't know. I don't know how to fix it, and I don't know what to do with it. So it wasn't like this in the preview, I swear. Well, anyway, here we are. It's Tuesday, and we are going to continue in Neil Gaiman's The Graveyard Book. And I have some exciting news. I went on a hike yesterday, and at the end of the hike was a little free library. And in it, one of my hiking partners found this R.L. Stein's The Cataluna Chronicles, The Evil Moon. A car to die for. So I think that might be our next book that we jump into. I think it could be fun. Anyway, I'm here. You're here. Let's get going. There were broken lumps of other people's stones and statues in the graveyard, but Bod knew that would have been entirely the wrong sort of thing to bring to the gray-eyed witch in the potter's field. It was going to take more than that. He decided not to tell anyone what he was planning, on the not entirely unreasonable basis that they would have told him not to do it. Over the next few days, his mind filled with plans, each more complicated and extravagant than the last. Mr. Pennyworth despaired. "I do believe," he announced, scratching his dusty mustache, "that you are getting, if anything, worse. You are not fading. You are obvious, boy. You are difficult to miss. If you came to me in company with a purple lion, a green elephant, and a scarlet unicorn astride, which was the King of England in his royal robes, I do believe that it is you and you alone that people would stare at, dismissing the others as minor irrelevancies." It's a fun word, isn't it? Bod simply stared at him and said nothing. He was wondering whether there were special shops in the places where the living people gathered that sold only headstones, and if so, how he could go about finding one, and fading was the least of his problems. He took advantage of Miss Barrow's willingness to be diverted from the subjects of grammar and composition to the subject of anything else at all to ask her about money. How exactly it worked, how one used it to get things one wanted. Bod had a number of coins he had found over the years. He had learned that the best place to find money was to go, afterwards, to wherever courting couples had used the grass of the graveyard as a place to cuddle and snuggle and kiss and roll about. He would often find metal coins on the ground in the place where they had been, and he had thought perhaps he could finally get some use of them. "How much would a headstone be?" he asked Miss Burrows. "In my time," she told him, "there were 15 guineas. I do not know what they would be today. More, I imagine. Much, much more." Bod had £2 and 53 pence. It would, he was quite certain, not be enough. It had been 4 years, almost half a lifetime, since Bod had visited the Indigo Man's tomb, but he still remembered the way. He climbed to the top of the hill until he was above the whole town, above even the top of the apple tree, above even the steeple of the little chapel, up where the Frobisher mausoleum stood like a rotten tooth. He slipped down into it behind the coffin, and down and still further down to the tiny stone steps cut into the center of the hill, and those he descended until he reached the stone chamber. It was dark in that tomb, dark as a tin mine, but Bod saw as the dead see, and the room gave up its secrets to him. The sleer was coiled around the wall of the barrow. He could feel it. It was as he remembered it. an invisible thing, all smoky tendrils and hate and greed. This time, however, he was not afraid of it. "Fear us," whispered the Sleer, "for we guard things precious and never lost." "I don't fear you," said Bod. "Remember? And I need to take something away from here." "Nothing ever leaves," came the reply from the coiled thing in the darkness. "The knife, the brooch, the goblet. The Sleer guards them in the darkness. We wait." "What?" "Pardon me for asking," said Bod, "but is this your grave?" "Master sets us here on the plain to guard, buries our skulls beneath a stone, leaves us here, knowing what we have to do. We guard the treasures until Master comes back." "I expect that he's forgotten all about you," pointed out Bod. "I'm sure he's been dead himself for ages." "We are the Sleer. We guard." Bod wondered just how long ago you had to go back before the deepest tomb inside the hill was on a plain. And he knew it must have been an extremely long time ago. He could feel the Sleer winding its waves of fear around him, like the tendrils of some carnivorous plant. He was beginning to feel a lot like Christmas, feel cold and slow, as if he had been bitten in the heart by some Arctic viper, and it was starting to pump its icy venom through its body. He took a step forward, so he was standing against the stone slab, and he reached down and closed his fingers around the coldness of the brooch. "Hiss," whispered the Sleer. "We guard that for the Master." "He won't mind," said Bod. He took a step backward, walking toward the stone steps, avoiding the desiccated remains of people and animals on the floor. The Sleer writhed angrily, twining around the tiny chamber like ghost smoke. Then it slowed. "It comes back," said the Sleer in its tangled triple voice. "Always comes back." Bod went up the stone steps inside the hill as fast as he could. At one point he imagined that there was something coming after him, but when he broke out of the top into the Frobisher mausoleum and he could breathe the cool dawn air, nothing moved or followed. Bod sat in the open air at the top of the hill and held the brooch. He thought it was all black at first, but then the sun rose, and he could see that the stone in the center of the black metal was a swirling red. It was the size of a robin's egg, which is very small, very, very small. And Bod stared into the stone, wondering if there were things moving in its heart, his eyes and soul deep in the crimson world. If Bod had been smaller, he would have wanted to put it into his mouth. The stone was held in place by a black metal clasp, by something that looked like claws, with something else crawling around it. The something else looked almost snake-like, but it had too many heads. Bod wondered if that was what the Sleer looked like in the daylight. I knew it. He wandered down the hill, taking all the shortcuts he knew, through the ivy tangle that covered the Bartleby family vault, and inside, the sound of the Bartlebys grumbling and readying for sleep, and on and over and through the railings and into the potter's field. He called, "Liza! Liza!" and looked around. "Good morrow, young lummox," said Liza's voice. Bod could not see her, but there was an extra shadow beneath the hawthorn tree, and as he approached it, the shadow resolved itself into something pearlescent and translucent in the early morning light, something girl-like, something gray-eyed. "I should be decently sleeping," she said. "What kind of carrying on is this?" "Your headstone," he said. "I wanted to know what you want on it." "My name," she said. "It must have my name on it, with a big E for Elizabeth, like the old queen that died when I was born, and a big H for Hempstock. H. More than that I care not, for I did never master my letters." "What about dates?" asked Bod. "William the Conqueror, 1066, she sang in the whisper of the dawn wind in the hawthorn tree. "A big E, if you please, and a big H." "Did you have a job?" asked Bod. "I mean, when you weren't being a witch?" "I done laundry," said the dead girl. And then the morning sunlight flooded the wasteland, and Bod was alone. It was 9 in the morning, when all the world is sleeping. Bod was determined to stay awake. He was, after all, on a mission. He was 8 years old, and the world beyond the graveyard held no terrors for him. Clothes. He would need clothes. His usual dress of a gray winding sheet was, he knew, quite wrong. It was good in the graveyard, the same color as stone and as shadows, but if he was going to dare the world beyond the graveyard walls, he would need to blend in there. There were some clothes in the crypt beneath the ruined church, but Bod did not want to go down to the crypt, not even in daylight. While Bod was prepared to justify himself to Master and Mistress Owens, he was not about to explain himself to Silas. The very thought of those dark eyes, angry, or worse still, disappointed, filled him with shame. There was a gardener's hut at the far end of the graveyard, a small green building that smelled like motor oil, and in which the old mower sat and rested unused, along with an assortment of ancient garden tools. The hut had been abandoned when the last gardener had retired, before Bod was born, and the task of keeping the graveyard had been shared between the council, who sent in a man to cut the grass and clean the paths once a month from April to September, and the local volunteers and the friends of the graveyard. A huge padlock on the door protected the contents of the hut, but Bod had long ago discovered the loose wooden board in the back. Sometimes he would go to the gardener's hut and sit and think when he wanted to be by himself. As long as he had been going to the hut, there had been a brown workingman's jacket hanging on the back of the door, forgotten or abandoned years before, along with a green-stained pair of gardening jeans. The jeans were much too big for him, but he rolled up the cuffs until his feet showed. Then he made a belt out of brown garden twine and tied it around his waist. There were boots in one corner, and he tried putting them on, but they were so big and encrusted with mud and concrete that he could barely shuffle in them, and if he took a step, the boots remained on the floor of the shed. He pushed the jacket out through the space in the loose board, squeezed himself out, then put it on. If he rolled up the sleeves, he decided it worked quite well. It had big pockets, and he thrust his hands into them and felt quite the dandy. Bod walked down to the main gate of the graveyard and looked out through the bars. A bus rattled past in the street. There were cars there, and noise and shops. Behind him, a cool green shade, overgrown with trees and ivy. Home. His heart pounding, Bod walked out into the world. That's terrifying. He's an 8-year-old little boy. Ebenezer Bulger had seen some odd types in his time. If you owned a shop like Ebenezer's, you'd see them too. The shop in the warren of streets in the old town, a little antiques shop, a little bit junk shop, a little bit pawnbrokers, and not even Ebenezer himself was entirely certain which bit was which, brought odd types and strange people, some of them wanting to buy, some of them needing to sell. Ebenezer Bulger traded over the counter, buying and selling, and he did a better trade behind the counter and in the back room, accepting objects that may not have been acquired entirely honestly, and then quietly shifting them on. His business was an iceberg. Only the dusty little shop was visible on the surface. The rest of it was underneath, and that was just how Ebenezer Bolger wanted it. Ebenezer Bolger Ebenezer Bolger had thick spectacles and a permanent expression of mild distaste, as if he had just realized that the milk in his tea had been on the turn, and he could not get the sour taste of it out of his mouth. The expression served him well when people tried to sell him things. "Honestly," he would tell them, sour-faced, "it's not really worth anything at all. I'll give you what I can, though, as it has sentimental value. You are lucky to get anything like what you thought you wanted from Ebenezer Bolger." A business like Ebenezer Bolger's brought in strange people, but the boy who came in that morning was one of the strangest Ebenezer could remember in a lifetime of cheating strange people out of their valuables. He looked to be about 7 years old, and dressed in his grandfather's clothes. He smelled like a shed. His hair was long and shaggy, and he seemed extremely grave. His hands were deep in the pockets of a dusty brown jacket, but even with the hands out of sight, Ebenezer could tell that something was clutched extremely tightly, protectively, in the boy's right hand. "Excuse me," said the boy. "Aye, aye, Sonny Jim," said Ebenezer Bolger warily. "Kids," he thought. "Either they've nicked something, or they're trying to sell their toys." Either way, he usually said no. Buy stolen property from a kid, and next thing you know, you'd have an enraged adult accusing you of having given little Johnny or Matilda a tenner for their wedding ring. More trouble than they was worth. Kids. "I need something for a friend of mine," said the boy. "And I thought maybe you could buy something I've got." "I don't buy stuff from kids," said Ebenezer Bolger flatly. Bod took his hand out of his pocket and put the brooch down on the grimy countertop. Bolger glanced down at it. Then he looked at it. He removed his spectacles. He took an eyepiece from the countertop, and he screwed it into his eye. What? He took an eyepiece from the countertop, and he screwed it into his eye. He turned on a little light on the counter and examined the brooch through the eyeglass. "Snakestone," he said to himself, not to the boy. Then he took the eyepiece out, replaced his glasses, and fixed the boy with a sour and suspicious look. "Where did you get this?" Ebenezer Bolger asked. Bod said, "Do you want to buy it?" "You stole it. You nicked this from a museum or somewhere, didn't you?" "No," said Bod flatly. "Are you going to buy it, or shall I go and find somebody who will?" Ebenezer Bolger's sour mood changed then. Suddenly he was all affability. He smiled broadly. "I'm sorry," he said. "It's just you don't see many pieces like this. Not in a shop like this. Not outside of a museum. But I would certainly like it. Tell you what. Why don't we sit down over tea and biscuits? I've got a packet of chocolate chip cookies in the back room, and decide how much something like this is worth, eh?" Bod was relieved that the man was finally being friendly. "I need enough to buy a stone," he said. "A headstone for a friend of mine. Oh, she's not really my friend, just someone I know. I think she helped make my leg better, you see." Ebenezer Bolger, paying little attention to the boy's prattle, led him behind the counter and opened the door to the storeroom, a windowless little space, every inch of which was crammed high with teetering cardboard boxes, each filled with junk. There was a safe in there, in the corner, a big old one. There was a box filled with violins, an accumulation of stuffed dead animals, chairs without seats, books and prints. There was a small desk beside the door, and Ebenezer Bolger pulled up the only chair and sat down, letting Bod stand. Ebenezer rummaged in a drawer in which Bod could see a half-empty bottle of whiskey and pulled out an almost finished packet of chocolate chip cookies, and he offered one to the boy. He turned on the desk light, looked at the brooch again, the swirls of red and orange in the stone, and he examined the black metal band that encircled it, suppressing a little shiver at the expression on the heads of the snake things. "This is old," he said. "It's priceless," he thought. "Probably not really worth much, but you never know." Bod's face fell. Ebenezer Bulger tried to look reassuring. "I just need to know that it's not stolen, though, before I can give you a penny. Did you take it from your mum's dresser? Nick it from a museum? You can tell me. I'll not get you into trouble. I just need to know." Bod shook his head. He munched on his cookie. "Then where did you get it?" Bod said nothing. Ebenezer Bulger did not want to put down the brooch, but he pushed it across the desk to the boy. "If you can't tell me," he said, "you'd better take it back. There has to be trust on both sides, after all. Nice doing business with you. Sorry it couldn't go any further." Bod looked worried. Then he said, "I found it in an old grave, but I can't say where." He stopped because naked greed and excitement had replaced the friendliness on Ebenezer Bulger's face. "And there's more like this there?" Bod said, "If you don't want to buy it, I'll find someone else. Thank you for the biscuit." Bulger said, "You're in a hurry, eh? Mom and Dad waiting for you, I expect." The boy shook his head, then wished he had nodded. "Nobody waiting. Good." Ebenezer Bulger closed his hands around the brooch. "Now, you tell me exactly where you found this, eh?" "I don't remember," said Bod. "Too late for that," said Ebenezer Bulger. "Suppose you have a little think for a bit about where it came from. Then, when you've thought, we'll have a little chat, and you'll tell me." Scary. He got up and walked out of the room, closing the door behind him. He locked it with a large metal key. Oh no! He opened his hand and looked at the brooch and smiled hungrily. There was a ding from the bell above the shop door to let him know someone had entered, and he looked up guiltily, but there was no one there. The door was slightly ajar, though, and Bulger pushed it shut, and then for good measure he turned around the sign in the window so it said closed. He pushed the bolt shut. Didn't want any busybodies turning up today. The autumn day had turned from sunny to gray, and a light patter of rain ran down the grubby shop window. Ebenezer Bulger picked up the telephone from the counter and pushed at the buttons with fingers that barely shook. "Pay dirt, Tom," he said. "Get over here soon as you can." Bod realized that he was trapped when he heard the lock turn in the door. He pulled on the door, but it held fast. He felt stupid for having been lured inside, foolish for not trusting his first impulses, to get as far away from the sour-faced man as possible. He had broken all the rules of the graveyard, and everything had gone wrong. What would Silas say? Or the Owenses? He could feel himself beginning to panic, and he suppressed it, pushing the worry back down inside him. It would all be good. He knew that. Of course, he needed to get out. He examined the room he was trapped in. It was little more than a storeroom with a desk in it. The only entrance was the door. He opened the desk drawer, finding nothing but small pots of paint used for brightening up antiques, and a paintbrush. He wondered if he would be able to throw paint in the man's face and blind him for long enough to escape. He opened the top of a pot of paint and dipped it in his finger. "What you doing?" asked a voice close to his ear. "Nothing," said Bod, screwing the top on the paint pot and dropping it onto one of the jacket's enormous pockets. Liza Hempstock looked at him unimpressed. "Why you're in here?" she asked. And whose old bag of lard out there? Oh my goodness. A page appears to be stuck. It's his shop. I was trying to sell him something. Why? None of your beeswax. She sniffed. Well, she said, you should get on back to the graveyard. I can't. He's locked me in. Of course you can. Just slip through the wall. He shook his head. I can't. I can only do it at home because they gave me the freedom of the graveyard when I was a baby. He looked up at her under the electric light. It was hard to see her properly, but Bod had spent his life talking to dead people. Anyway, what are you doing here? What are you doing out from the graveyard? It's daytime, and you're not like Silas. You're meant to stay in the graveyard. She said, There's rules for those in graveyards, but not for those as was buried in unhallowed ground. Nobody tells me what to do or where to go. She glared at the door. I don't like that man, she said. I'm going to see what he's doing. A flicker, and Bod was alone in the room once more. He heard a rumble of distant thunder. In the cluttered darkness of Bulger's antiquities, Ebenezer Bulger looked up suspiciously, certain that someone was watching him, then realized he was being foolish. The boy's locked in the room, he told himself. The front door's locked. He was polishing the metal clasps surrounding the snake stone as gently and as carefully as an archaeologist on a dig, taking off the black and revealing the glittering stone beneath it. He was beginning to regret calling Tom Hustings over, although Hustings was big and good for scaring people. He was also beginning to regret that he was going to have to sell the brooch when he was done. It was special. The more it glittered under the tiny light on his counter, the more he wanted it to be his, and only his. My precious. There was more where this came from, though. The boy would tell him. The boy would lead him to it. The boy. An idea struck him. He put down the brooch reluctantly and opened a drawer behind the counter, taking out a metal biscuit tin filled with envelopes and cards and slips of paper. He reached in and took out a card, only slightly larger than a business card. It was black-edged. There was no name or address printed on it, though. Only one word, handwritten in the center in an ink that had faded to brown. Jack. On the back of the card, in pencil, Ebenezer Bulger had written instructions to himself in his tiny, precise handwriting as a reminder. Although he would not have been likely to forget the use of the card. How to use it to summon the man Jack. No, not summon. Invite. You did not summon people like him. And knocking on the outer door of the shop, Bulger tossed the card down onto the counter and walked over to the door, peering out into the wet afternoon. Hurry up, called Tom Hustings. It's miserable out here. Dismal. I'm getting soaked. Bulger unlocked the door, and Tom Hustings pushed his way in, his raincoat and hair dripping. What's so important that you can't talk about it over the phone, then? Our fortune, said Ebenezer Bulger with his sour face. That's what. Hastings took off his raincoat and hung it on the back of the shop door. What is it? Something's good. Fell off the back of a lorry. Treasure, said Ebenezer Bulger. 2 kinds. He took his friend over to the counter, showed him the brooch under the little light. It's old, isn't it? From pagan times, said Ebenezer. From Druid times, before the Romans came. It's called snake stone. Seen 'em in museums. I've never seen metalwork like that, or one so fine. Must have belonged to a king. The lad who found it says it comes from a grave. Think of a barrow filled with stuff like this. Might be worth doing it legit, said Hustings, thoughtfully. Declare it as a treasure trove. They have to pay us market value for it, and we could make them name it after us. The Hustings Bulger Bequest. Oh, and we are right there. So we're just going to finish on this page. Okay, let's keep going. Boga Hustings, said Albanezer automatically. Then he said, there's a few people I know of. People with real money would pay more than market value if they could hold it as you are. For Tom Hustings was fingering the brooch gently like a man stroking a kitten, and there'd be no questions asked. He reached out his hand, and reluctantly Tom Hustings passed him the brooch. And we're going to stop there because we are at our cutoff point. And I tried to look ahead, and it looks like we still have quite a long way to go in chapter 4. These are very long chapters. So, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Oh, there we go. Look at that. I gave up, and it was the next page. Isn't that funny? Seems to be how things always work out. Okay, anyway, yeah, 143. Yeah, that's another, 14 pages. Great. Well, this is it. This concludes our evening together. Remember when I used to wear cute things? Remember that? When it was summer and it was warm? I'm being pathetic. It's been 60 degrees. It's really not even that bad. It's 40s at night, but whatever. So long ago, I vaguely remember. Anyway, have a beautiful evening. Stay spooky. Stay warm in your heart, because warmer days are coming. It's spring. Flowers are blooming. Things are happening. I hope that you feel it. A little peace, little love, a little heart just for you. Stay spooky. Stay weird. Read something. I love you. Drink your water.